And now, your go-to source for year-round fantasy hockey advice, DFS, and betting coverage. This is NHL Fantasy on Ice, presented by Skip, the official food delivery app of the NHL.
The JT Miller saga is officially over, my friends. Brought to you by our good friends over at Skip. It's time for another episode of NHL Fantasy on Ice, Week 18 Waiver Wire Edition. It is Nick Alberga and Jake Hahn with you.
Well, Nick, we might have to start moving our recordings to Friday nights because apparently that's when all the action happens in the National Hockey League, at least regarding trades. So you mentioned Miller. We're obviously going to get into that, the ramifications, the ripple effects in fantasy. And this episode is brought to you by Skip. Skip to the good part and get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip.
Sports in general, Jake, right now on fire. You look at what happened in the NBA over the weekend, just utter chaos. And again, as somebody who loves trades, this is my favorite time of year, but it's coming early because of the Four Nations, right?
Well, I promise the listeners we won't totally break down the Doncic trade in the NBA, but that was unbelievable. I think the whole sports world was shocked by that one. Maybe less so. I don't think the Miller trade is getting quite the ripple effects across the sports landscape, but certainly in the NHL landscape. And look, it finally happens. It's something we talked about now going back weeks. And I think once Jim Rutherford came out and admitted that there was something wrong there was some sort of friction and something going on, as much as Miller didn't want to talk about it, Pettersson didn't want to talk about it, felt like something had to happen. And I think, Nick, all along, we felt like it was probably going to be JT Miller on the move. So your initial thoughts, Miller going to the Rangers and the fantasy impact there?
Well, weirdly enough, I think the happiest guy, at least right now, is Mika Zibanejad. Like, if you were to tell me when the deal went down, I would think it would probably be the opposite, where he maybe is slotted as a 3 seed. But I like the approach to this. They put Zibanejad on the wing with Miller on that top line, and we'll throw you Artemi Panarin as well. And it instantly becomes one of the best lines in hockey. But like, we've been talking about this for a couple weeks. As soon as JT Miller gets traded, he's going to start to cook. It's a place he wants to be. He's like really good friends with Vinny Trocheck. So I think on the surface, I looked at that deal from a fantasy perspective. Clear win for the File and the team and everybody involved. Vancouver just to move on. How about you?
If I'm a Miller owner, I'm very happy because we know the talent of the player, right? We know the numbers that he's been able to put up in fantasy hockey over the last few years. And obviously this year just wasn't happening in Vancouver for a lot of different reasons. And the production clearly wasn't there really for anybody on that roster. Now he goes to a Rangers team that we know is talented, that's also went through their own struggles this year, right? Kind of coming out of them the last few weeks. So maybe it's good timing with Miller coming there. And they just totally stacked that top line right out of the gate. I watched that game on Saturday, and that line was all over the place, all over the ozone, creating chances. So I don't know if that's going to last long term, but at least for now, I'm a very happy JT Miller owner to see him playing with the bread man compared to what he was playing within Vancouver.
I like the other side of the spectrum too, where it's like even when you see Filipino score that goal on Sunday, you can tell like I'm the guy in the deal that they got for JT Miller. Like, let's change how things work here, and he scores that goal, and that's a weight lifted. And to see that, like, he's definitely on my watch list. PP2 right now looks like the 2C. I'm more curious to see who, like, long-term, playing around Hedo. But he's definitely a guy on my radar. But I like that aspect, too. Everybody's talking about JT Miller. What about the return? Because you look at a Hedo, you look at who he's been behind in New York for a couple of years now.
Well, and we're going to get to the waiver wire with Pete here in a little bit as well. But Hedo's a guy you could actually scoop up, right? Like JT Miller, you're not picking him up off the wire. Obviously, we're talking about it. Okay, if you're a Miller owner, how do you feel about this? Does seem like you're going to get a bump up. You make a good point, too, with Zibanejad, maybe some other players there in the Rangers that are going to feel the effects of JT Miller and maybe shifting line combos a little bit. I've always really liked Filipino as a player, Nick. It's just he's had some trouble staying healthy lately, but if he can stay healthy and he gets a decent line combo, because we remember he's been kind of stuck in that third line role with the Rangers, right? There's a chance in Vancouver, especially now with Miller gone, that maybe we can see him get a legitimate top 6 look and a little bit more power play time to show what he can do. So I would certainly go out there and take a speculative pickup on Filipino just to see where this goes in Vancouver, because I believe he's a very talented player.
Why is nobody talking about Elias Pettersson? Like, not to interrupt there, but nobody's talking about Elias Pettersson. It's all about JT Miller. Can't believe this happened. What about Pettersson, Jake? Because I, for one, something's funky, something's off. Like, I don't even know if I'm buying on the guy right now.
I'm not. I'm not.
Yeah.
It's going to take a lot for me to start buying on EP40. I've just been out on this file in general for a while. I've even going back to when he signed the contract, Nick, I did feel like he was a little bit overrated. Not to say he's not a great player. I just didn't think he was a player commanding of that kind of money. And so far he hasn't lived up to it in Vancouver. Now that could change. And he does, he teases you a little bit, right? He shows you these moments where he does something special and you think, man, if you could do that all the time, you would be an unbelievable player in this league. But it just hasn't all come together. But that being said, I do have to think there's going to be at least some increase there. Obviously, just with ice time, the whole Miller situation behind them. I think if I'm a Pettersson owner, I'm a little happier based on what happened, but by no means would I be expecting some sort of breakout performance the rest of the season. It's just not the way Vancouver plays. They play a very low event, kind of boring style, and I don't think that's conducive to guys, putting up monster numbers in fantasy.
And again, the ripple effects will be felt from this deal for the next couple weeks already in both cases when you look at Vancouver, when you look at the New York Rangers. Again, Pete Jensen's coming up for a look at this week's waiver wire list. Chris Meany will drop by as well for the On the Money segment brought to you by Bet365. But as mentioned, Jake, we got a couple of different trades. Not to mention Vancouver also picked up another Pettersson, but I think from a fantasy perspective, It's a wait-and-see approach on that front. I don't expect much from Marcus Pettersson fantasy-wise in Vancouver. And of note, too, Quinn Hughes is banged up there, too. Like, the timing is so Vancouver. You trade Miller, and then Quinn Hughes is hurt, right?
Well, yeah, and I saw that come down Sunday, basically right before the game. Quinn Hughes out, and sometimes you're just hoping, okay, it's just short term. I mean, all their offense goes through him, Nick. He's in on such a high percentage of the offense right now in Vancouver. I know he's a defenseman, but he just does everything for them. Maybe one of the more important players in the league to his team, right? So we got a week left before Four Nations. We'll kind of see where this injury goes, and obviously he'd be relied upon heavily for that U.S. team at Four Nations as well. So it's not like he's one of these players we talk about that, okay, you pick up an injury and you can massage it a little bit. You take the Four Nations break, an extra 2 weeks. He's wants to play in that tournament. So something to follow here moving forward. But that would be a monster injury. And we had a couple more defensemen in and out of the lineup, right?
Yeah, we do. There's a bunch of guys, different banged up, and Miro Heiskanen, we talked about on last podcast, and I just think trying to find those guys, you really have to lean in on the waiver wire, which again is coming up. But the Calgary Flames, Jake, for me, have been very intriguing the last year and a half. I think Craig Conroy has done a really good job, and it just we can't shake the correlation to the Vancouver Canucks today because a former Canuck, Andrei Kuzmenko, now dealt again. He's now with the Philadelphia Flyers. A weird trade from my perspective when you look at Philadelphia. I love the ads, buying low, if you will, from the Calgary look. When you get Morgan Frost, you get Joel Farabee. So far, it's been Huberdeau, Kadri, Farabee, Sharangovich, Frost, Pospisil, I guess, on the third line for the Calgary Flames, but clear upside on their side, right?
So I actually love how things are starting to shape up for the Calgary Flames right now, Nick. Maybe not so much for this year. I'm not looking at them and saying, okay, this team's going to make some crazy run in the Western Conference playoffs. I think if they just make the playoffs, that's a successful season for the Flames. But just looking at how they could retool this team compared to where were we at about a year ago with the Flames? Blow it up, right? Trade everybody, get all your veteran pieces out there, Huberdeau, Kadri, start from scratch. I don't know if they have to do that anymore, right? Like, is Huberdeau worth the money he's making? No, but he's playing a little bit better. Kadri's still going to do his thing. And now they're starting to inject some youth into this roster, kind of similar to what Washington has done so successfully this year. So I think Calgary can maybe go about it a similar path, and I'm curious to see what they do in the offseason. So I like the move from Calgary. And doesn't Kuzmenko just have Torts Doghouse written all over him, Nick? I think I tweeted you on Thursday when that trade came down. The popcorn line presented by Cineplex, him and Michkov can we get that going? Maybe I don't know who the third will be on that line, but the popcorn line, I kind of like that.
I like it too. I would love to know the direction. I guess if we did some research, Kuzmenko and Michkov played like 14 games together in the KHL, another no-hit league, but less hitting in that league compared to the NHL. Just wild stuff. Like, I think you talk about asset control, and you look at Philadelphia, you got two youngish type players, and you're picking up a Kuzmenko who's been bouncing around the league, and your head coach. I just think it's brutal management, I'll be honest.
Well, and I've generally liked a lot of what Danny Briere's done since he's taken over there in Philly, right? I think he's built something that is, I can look at and go, okay, and we saw them do some good things last year. I know it fizzled out. At times this year, they've done some good things. So generally, I've liked his moves. This one, I'm not so sure about. I get it. Kuzmenko came to the league. He came close to 40 goals, right, in that first season in the league. So maybe there's this thought that they can unlock something. They can get him back to being that guy, and we'll see, because it clearly had fizzled out in Calgary this year. Like, the numbers weren't there at all, not even close to what he was doing. So that one does leave me scratching my head a little bit, but maybe the Flyers see potential. Do you see potential on the other side of this, Nick, in either of those players going over to Calgary from a fantasy perspective? Because, again, these are guys that are going to be sitting on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues. Would you be picking up either of those guys?
I think if you're asking me to pick one of the two right now, it's probably Joel Farabee, just because of deployment, right? Playing with Kadri and Huberdeau. And I think down the road, maybe even 20 games from now, Morgan Frost could be the 2C of this team. But, there are some veterans on that roster. Calgary's pushing for a playoff spot, so it's natural you're going to lean on guys who have got you there and in the conversation at the very least. So Farabee, I think, ahead of Frost. But, again, all in all, the trade, I really like it from the Calgary perspective, where it's two guys who are in dire need of a change of scenery. You get it, and you go to an upstart franchise like that that's feeling good, positive, playing much better than expected this year, getting the goaltending. I think these guys could uncover some value down the road here.
Yeah, I'm totally with you just on the direction of Calgary in general, but I think from the short term as well, I'd give either guy a look. Obviously, it comes down to league size, and you mentioned line combinations. At least right now, Farabee's getting the better of the two line combos, but that could change. Maybe Frost gets a decent look, and Frost was the guy I liked more this year in Philly, at least with the role that he was getting. So he would be the guy I'd assume would have the higher ownership right now. So Farabee, I think, would be a realistic pickup, I think, in almost any league, to just take a flyer on it and see where it goes. And I think he was the classic guy, because I felt like Frost was actually playing decent in Philly, right? Farabee was the guy that needed, I think, a change of scenery, because it just wasn't happening. So going over to Calgary, getting that second shot as still a relatively young player, I think those are the types of players I like to take a flyer on in fantasy.
It was almost the theme of the week in fantasy hockey and in the NHL in reality, change of scenery. And let's bring in Pete Jensen from NHL.com, of course, and doing great work here on the podcast. Just the waiver wire list, week 18, Pete, but there's just so many different names, even intertwining the Granlund name into the conversation, going over from San Jose to Dallas, a cheeky fit there. And even Brandon Saad, of course he goes to Vegas, right?
I know, it's crazy to see him in that uniform for sure. But yeah, I'm gravitating towards one teammate beneficiary. Mason Marchment came back over the weekend, scored a goal in his first game back. Good category coverage, good numbers year to date, 28 points in 34 games for Dallas. Their middle six forward group is stacked. When I look at this Granlund trade, this is the stuff that could kind of benefit Marchment, benefit Stankoven, benefit the lineup across the board, regardless of what injuries they deal with the rest of the way. And also, to answer your question from earlier, I like Morgan Frost slightly more than Farabee, but both these guys have some good edge stats, highlights this season, and Frost, I think, can take the next step in his career, going away from kind of a stagnant offense and joining a Flames offense, guys, that is quietly 7th in shot attempts percentage at 5-on-5. So they've actually been really good possession-wise this season.
I did see Morgan Frost on your list there, Pete, and I do like that. I like that look. I also like the fact you got a couple of Jets on your list this week as well, right? We know the top guys are all owned up, and what the Jets have been capable of this year, very consistent team, but you're mining some fantasy value from the secondary players in Winnipeg, right?
Definitely. Perfetti and Nemesnikov are getting going again. They're playing with Nikolai Ehlers on that second line. They've been playing together all year, really. But I think Winnipeg is really one of the top teams in the league. Even when you take into account their past playoff struggles, they seem like they're a different beast offensively this season. And they still have Hellebuck, of course, in their corner when the going gets tough. But I think that Cole Perfetti is one of the most underrated young players in the league. He's always kind of like that guy that doesn't get the top flight usage because Winnipeg's top line is so good, but he's starting to heat up here with a bunch of power play points, even when he's on power play 2, 7 points over his past 7 games or so. It's impressive where he's headed. And again, they're going to lose probably Ehlers in the offseason, so he'll take a future step up, I think, in keeper and dynasty leagues.
I thought it was so interesting, guys, just as an aside, that we get Thompson and Hellebuck on Saturday night, and it's a wild and chaotic game with goals aplenty, but that's just the way it works in the betting world sometimes. Pete, a name I'm really, really interested in, he's been on my radar for the last month, is Yuri Kulik with the Buffalo Sabres, right? Just game after game I've been watching, and he's scoring and he's picking up points, but now he's becoming a bigger and bigger story that he's landed on your waiver wire list for the week.
There's an awesome stat on Kulich. He is tied with Macklin Celebrini for the NHL rookie lead in even strength goals with 11. So total diamond in the rough. They've elevated him recently. Remember, Buffalo, with all their struggles, all the times we knocked them on a game-to-game basis with some of these blown leads and stuff, they are the youngest team in the NHL, and putting him up there with Peterka and Tage Thompson, that's a fantasy gold mine for the rest of the season. So only 4% rostered right now in fantasy leagues on Yahoo is Kulich, and I'm big on this player. They beat the Devils the other day. Thankfully, Tage Thompson sounds like he's okay after an injury scare. So full systems go for this Buffalo top line for some garbage time points.
Guys, we're like 20 minutes into this episode, and we still haven't talked to New York Islanders. So I think producer Phil Constantino is going to get a little bit upset. So I'll break the streak. We'll get some Islanders in there. And you have an Islander on your list here, Pete. It's on the back end. Now, I would bring up, and I mentioned this player last week, Alex Romanov, what he's doing on the back end. Huge minutes, blocking shots, hitting guys, picking up the odd point. I like him. But you've got Tony D on your list this week, Pete.
I mean, that cross ice end-to-end pass from Bo Horvat to Tony D, that's got to get you jacked up, right? Or Tony D, whatever you think about him, on or off the ice, he's scoring for the Islanders. They've won 7 of 8, of course, dropped the game against the Panthers the other day. Playing monster minutes, over 25 per game, and power play 1 usage in the absence of Noah Dobson because of injury. So, yeah, Tony D's got to be added. We polled the fans. I mean, people are dropping Brant Clark for Tony D. People are dropping Mike Matheson for Tony D. People are dropping all these different fringe defensemen at such a difficult position to pick up guys that are going to produce points for you right now.
Yeah, it's so hard. As mentioned, again, we talk about this every week, just so hard to find that long-term defenseman. And again, especially without Dobson on the island, it's Tony DeAngelo's back end when it comes to PP1 and just running and quarterbacking that team offensively. What about the crease, Peter? There's some names that intrigue you this week?
There are. Spencer Knight has been trending up for a little while, slowly but surely. And he actually has one of the best save percentages in the league. I was looking when his opponents are on the power play, 7th among goalies, qualifying leaders in that category. So he steps it up in those situations where kind of things are stacked against him. He's a nice 1B to Bobrovsky, who had a nice week, but overall this season has not been up to his usual elite self, I would say. So, yeah, Spencer Knight I like. Also, Alex Nedeljkovic had a shutout the other day. That guy's been good in his career. I don't trust the Penguins much, but he's taken over the number one. Tristan Jarry got waived and stuff like that. So maybe it's Nedeljkovic's team for some quality starts the rest of the way for Pittsburgh as they continue to refuse to rebuild with Crosby, but maybe that'll mean something good for Nedeljkovic rest of the season.
Yeah, Pittsburgh is very intriguing in general, looking ahead to the March 7th trade deadline. What else they do? Marcus Pettersson the first to fall there, but I think a lot of people expecting some different things from that team. NHL.com/fantasy, where you can check out the entire list for Week 18. I can't believe we're there, but February 3rd to 9th, don't forget the final week before the 2-week break here for the Four Nations face-off. 48 games in total. Just 1 on Monday, which kind of stinks, I won't lie. 14 Tuesday, 3 Wednesday, 9 Thursday, 5 Friday, 14 on Saturday, Jake, and then 2 on Sunday. The 4-game teams, Montreal, Ottawa, Tampa, Utah, you want to be all over. The 2-game teams, Anaheim, Buffalo, Detroit, Winnipeg. Anything stick out for you, Jake?
Well, yeah, 1 game on a Monday is a bit of a buzzkill, Nick, after the weekend. You'd like a few more than that, but it does get better as the week goes on. Super Bowl week, so we know the Habs, they love those back-to-back home games on Super Bowl weekend, right? The Saturday, Sunday matinee. Love that the Habs do that. I wish there was even a little more hockey Sunday before the Super Bowl. It doesn't start till like 6:30. We might as well have a few games on, right? So we do get a couple. I think I'd look to Montreal. I'd look to some of those pieces, Nick, just so you get a couple guys, couple starts on the weekend. Ottawa's another one. They get the Monday night game, 4-game week, like you mentioned. So maybe you look at your Ridley Griggs in a deep league, some secondary players on Ottawa and Montreal. I think that's where I'm first going to gravitate towards this week.
I'm hoping for a bounce back because one of my keeper league teams, I had maybe the worst week of all time ever playing fantasy hockey in 20 years. I think I had 15 points from my. It was sickening.
You need the Four Nations break.
Happened.
Your team needs the Four Nations break. You're like limping into the break. Okay, let's hit the reset button and let's come out of it refreshed a little bit.
Buddy, I got pumped by like the 11th place team, and I'm like the 4th place team. It made no sense, but half my roster is like Montreal Canadiens, so I sort of get it. They struggled a bit offensively, and it wasn't really like the big guys scoring. But we move forward. That's all we can do sometimes in fantasy hockey. It's now time for On the Money, brought to you by Bet365. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 19 or older. Ontario only. Please play responsibly. If you or someone you know has concerns about gambling, visit connectsontario.ca as we bring in Chris Meany. I mean, so many different avenues we can go. I think we should start with the JT Miller trade, just your initial reaction to that. And from a betting landscape, how would you look at it?
Yeah, first of all, you don't want to have too many Habs, Nick, on your squad. I saw Patrick Laine had one shift yesterday in the third. Kirby Dach sat on the bench as well, so not a good game for either of those two guys. But yeah, what a shakeup in the NHL. I think we all thought that JT Miller was going to get traded at some point, and he's linked to his former team for a few weeks now. I love it from the Rangers standpoint. I mean, this guy is an absolute baller from a fantasy hockey standpoint and in the betting market as well. We talked about him over at NHL.com/fantasy on Saturday against the Bruins. He was minus 130 for a point, 2 goals, 4 points, 3 power play points, 6 shots, 12 faceoff wins, 8 hits. Like, he does it all. And I heard you talking earlier about Mika Zibanejad. He was plus money for a point on Saturday against the Bruins and plus money for a point on Sunday against the Vegas Golden Knights. 21 minutes he played in the first game. You got to go all the way back to December 3rd to see the last time he played 21 minutes in a game. So certainly one of the biggest beneficiaries from the move. 4 points, 3 power play points, and 9 shots. This is a guy that the past couple of years loved to shoot the puck. Very quiet in the first couple months of the season. So he played on the wing in the first game. He played down the middle in the second game. They had Miller on the wing. So take a look at those two guys in the betting landscape, and we'll see what else the Rangers lines look like, Jake. I was maybe a bump for Chris Kreider, but I looked at the game yesterday against Vegas, and 12 minutes. Like, only Rempe and Kool-Aid played fewer minutes at 5 and 5 than Chris Kreider. So somebody to keep an eye on, but certainly Mika Zibanejad, JT Miller, Panarin, these guys are going to be gold mine in the prop game.
You mentioned it was Zibanejad. I know Nick brought him up earlier in the podcast as well. I think he's the guy in the prop market I'm looking to. Okay, now I feel a little better taking his shots, maybe taking his points with this bump up. If you're wondering, the Rangers are 40-1 to win the Stanley Cup over at Bet365. I don't know if I'm in on that number because they have to. I mean, if they make the playoffs, they're a team that I think could be dangerous compared to maybe these other Eastern Conference chase teams, right? But maybe I need a little bit more than 40, but an intriguing number there. Is there any other future numbers you're kind of eyeing up right now, Meany? I still only have one in the hopper, but I'm looking at Bet365 right now. The Vegas Golden Knights at 15-1 have my interest a little bit. When you compare that to like Edmonton at 6-1, I'm getting almost 3 times the price, 2.5 times the price on Vegas, who I think is arguably better than Edmonton, more complete.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I have 4 teams written down here. You brought up the Rangers at 40-1. I think it's worth a flyer, right? I mean, this team, President's Trophy winners last year, they got Shesterkin between the pipes. I still think they have some issues defensively. They were really loose in their game against the Bruins, and Vegas took it to them in the first 40 minutes yesterday before they had a really strong third period. But 40-1 with that goaltending, if they can shape up their defense, maybe add somebody on the blue line. But Vegas at 15-1 is terrific, and I think we've talked about this a couple times, right, Nick? This team will make moves at the deadline. They will add. Mm-hmm. This is what they do. And when they're fully healthy on the blue line, with Hanifin and Pietrangelo and Shea Theodore, if they can get the goaltending, we know what Jack Eichel can do. 15-1 is a really good number. And I'll throw 2 other teams at you, Nick. Dallas, right? Granlund is such a good addition. That team is so deep. If they get Sagan back for the playoffs, Dadonov's going to go on the 4th line. He's got 15 goals, right? They are so deep at I think, the first 3 lines. And then Florida is cooking too. And Nick, I heard you say a couple weeks ago that this team was maybe just in cruise control in the first couple months of the season. Now we're here into February. They've won like 3 of their past 4. They're dominating. They got Verhaeghe up on that top line with Barkov and Reinhart. I love when Paul Maurice puts those 3 together. So at Florida at 9-1, I know it's tough to go back to the finals a 3rd straight year, but they're the team to beat in the East.
It feels like this year specifically, outside of Edmonton, because that conversation's been so loud, there's just a lot of teams who I think have potential to do something substantial in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it makes for chaos and it makes for fun. Our apologies, by the way, like we're 25 or so minutes into this thing. We haven't mentioned the Ottawa Senators. I have to give them credit. I know I've ripped that team multiple times in this pod before, but they're playing excellent. And to come out the way they did, specifically after Minnesota took care and smothered Toronto. They smothered Montreal, Marc-Andre Fleury in that game. And to beat up on the Wild the way they did, I thought was a big-time statement. I'm starting to believe a bit more in that team. Not to mention, still without their number one goalie right now. How do you view them from a future standpoint here, even maybe winning the Atlantic Division?
Yeah, I like them as a playoff squad. I really like where they're at, and Allmark's really close to coming back, and he was phenomenal before the injury. Playing in Nashville tonight as dogs, right? I know the Preds have points in 8 of their last 10 home games, but they've lost 4 straight. Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Vancouver, Anaheim. They struggled to get by San Jose, shootout wins and back-to-back. But I really like where Ottawa's at. And, Brady Tkachuk went through a bit of a slump. They got Claude Giroux up on that top line with Stützle. Look at Giroux tonight, minus 120 for a point. He's plus 140 for an assist, 5 points over a 4-game point streak. Brady's getting going a little bit here. 2 goals in his past 3. Stützle's got 7 points over his past 4. But a guy that I don't think a lot of people talk about is Jake Sanderson. This guy's a horse on the blue line. He's minus 110 for a point, plus 125 for an assist. He has 8 points over a 4-game point streak and touch in all categories. 4 power play points, 2 shorthanded points, 13 shots. He's coming off the 4-point game in that 6-0 win against the Minnesota Wild. So I really do like where Ottawa's at. They could be aggressive, maybe adding somebody on the back end or in their bottom 6, but it would certainly be fun, Jake, if they played the Leafs, right? The Battle of Ontario. If they win tonight, they're only going to be 2 points back at Toronto.
It means I grew up going to those games. The old Leafs Sens the playoff series they used to have back in the day. It was excellent. It's been a while since the Battle of Ontario's been back. So that would be cool. And obviously the Sens would play the underdog role there, but not significantly. I think they would give them a good series if that does indeed come to fruition. This is a sneaky big game for them tonight, Nick. I'm curious if you have a play on it. It sounds like Meany's leaning towards a couple props. I think I'm leaning towards the Sens for the plus money. You mentioned it when we went over the schedule. They have a busy week this week, and you don't want to limp into 4 Nations not playing well. And this is the front end of a back-to-back. They're on the road in Tampa on Tuesday. Then they actually play in Tampa again. I think it's on Thursday. So 3 road games in 4 nights. You always want to win the first one. You don't want to put yourself in a tough spot those next couple games. So I think the Sens know what's on the table tonight, and I feel like you get a really good effort from them. We should note Mieralainen got sent back down, so it'll be Allmark Forsberg, I suppose, for this week. We'll see if we see Mieralainen back in the league at some point.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that on Ottawa because I think it's a real are you a real team game? Honestly, you're playing Nashville, an inferior opponent. They've been losing a bunch as of late. I understand it's on the road. You got to find a way, and maybe they look ahead to the Tampa game on Tuesday, which is another big one as you just talked about. But I am like you, Jake. I'm going to play Ottawa in that game. I'm going to play a Stützle anytime goal as well. And then conversely, you looked at Tuesday's slate, busier of course, but Ottawa-Tampa. I'm going to take Tampa. I just think Tampa is the better team. I think at some point in time they're going to wake up from all this mess. Like they're another story right now is the Tampa Bay Lightning losing left and right and losing ground in the standings. And it's like you look at the way that team started the year. They had so many games in hand. You would think it maybe goes back the other way. But those are a couple of different things I would look at, certainly from the Ottawa perspective means.
Yeah, I love it, Nick. Absolutely. I don't know what's going on with Tampa Bay, but Cooper said a couple weeks ago, the gap is closed with some of these teams that you thought weren't great in the Atlantic, like the Ottawa Senators and the Detroit Red Wings, who just keep on winning hockey games. And maybe take a look at them tomorrow in Seattle to keep rolling. Colorado, a puck line against Vancouver, a team that absolutely is just broken at the moment. Matthew Nyes up on the top line, his return playing the Calgary Flames. And, I'll end here with just Dallas. I couldn't agree more with Pete's analysis on the Stars, and Pete DeBoer had 9 different line combinations in that game yesterday against the Columbus Blue Jackets. So it's hard to keep up. Like, you don't know what he's going to do, but guys like Mason Marchment, Mikhail Granlund, Dadonov, Stankoven, even Roope Hintz, who we had in the article on Saturday, nearly plus money for a point. Like, there's going to be so many different line combinations, Jake, but all 3 lines can score. It's a good spot against the Ducks. Instead of taking them at like minus 350 or 400 to win a hockey game, maybe just take a look at some of those point props for some of those players, because a guy like Stankoven is going to be plus money, and his line mates have now improved with this addition of Granlund.
Well, yeah, and there's a few good point prop games on Tuesday night. I think Columbus and Buffalo is another one, guys, that maybe we stack it a little bit. We get Fantilli's been a great prop guy right now in the absence of Sean Monahan, shots, points, whatever you want to look at. Tage Thompson has come to life in Buffalo. JJ Peterka is another one I like for shots and a point. So I think that's a game I'm going to be targeting. Maybe get a little same game parlay going over on Bet365. But Tuesday night, Nick. Tuesday night's the night. I know only one game Monday, but we make up for it on Tuesday with a crazy slate.
Yeah, we forgot the revenge game. Edmonton at St. Louis, another one. Dylan Holloway, I'm going to play the point prop, the shot prop on that front. So, gents, as per usual, excellent stuff. Breaking news coming in from Bet365, where every nail-biting overtime win, breakaway, pick six, three-point shot, underdog win, buzzer beater, shootout, walk-off, and absolutely every play in between is amazing. From football to basketball and hockey to baseball, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 19 or older. Ontario only. Please play responsibly. If you or someone you know has concerns about gambling, visit connectsontario.ca, Jake.
I'm excited, Nick. This is the last week. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself for a couple weeks with no NHL hockey. I know we have the Four Nations, but there's not that many games. I'm excited for those games, but I think there's going to be a couple nights where I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself. So expect a phone call from me. Maybe I'll be a little bit bored some nights.
Yeah, we'll just talk about life. There's one thing you can do. You can check out NHL Unscripted with Adnan Virk and Jason Demers, the latest episode dropping last week, so check that out. Also, don't forget, coming up on Thursday, Week 18 mailbag edition. I'm sure a lot of questions stemming from these trades, so that's coming up later on this week, Jake.
Yeah, so the ripple effects from this trade, I think we're going to be for both these trades, we're going to be feeling it. Hey, even the third trade, right? The Morgan Frost Farabee trade. I think there's some interest there, long term, short term, and maybe we're not done with trades yet this year.
And guys, wanted to throw in a futures play. Phil Constantino's New York Islanders to make the playoffs, playing very well at plus 250 on Bet365. That's still a pretty big number. I'm not a huge Lou Lamoriello supporter at this point, but I am a Patrick Waugh supporter and certainly an Ilya Sorokin supporter. So I think that those guys can do the job and at least get them to sneak in at the end of the day.
How much did Phil pay you to say that, Pete, to put the Islanders in the playoffs? I actually do like it, though. This is what they do. They're the cockroaches. They just never go away. No matter what, you pull up the standings at the end of the year, Islanders are always going to be there. It's amazing.
Yeah,
I like it. Yeah.
Another team that should rebuild, I think, but they're gonna try to string it together here the last couple of months.
We'll see. This race is going to be outstanding in the Eastern Conference, boys. That's for sure. Thank you to producer Phil Constantino, for Jay Kahn, Pete Jensen, and Chris Meany. I'm Nick Alberga. You've been listening to NHL Fantasy on Ice, delivered by Skip. Skip to the good part and get groceries, meals, and essentials delivered right to your door on Skip.